Not really helping, Roger. All right, can you go away? Bye. I decided to do something a little bit different this week, and first of all, film outside where there's actually light. My room is really dark and I'm still trying to figure out what to do about that. But I'm also just going to show you up front all of the 4 things that I'm going to do today, because I have quite a few samples, and that way I can just show you them all at once. And hopefully you'll stick around and watch the video still, because I often throw in lots of little things and tricks about how to do them. So the first one is, oh, before I forget, this is kind of switching into the more art quilty things. So remember there were 4 categories: kind of basic, utilitarian, creative quilting, art quilting, and then my favorite last category is that's just crazy. So I'm looking forward to that one. But this is kind of moving into the more art quilty things that I think are really fun, but there's definitely a lot of overlap and impossible to define them exactly. But this one is using netting to attach appliques. So instead of stitching on the applique, you can stitch around the edge, and there's a couple reasons why that's beneficial. So we'll get into that in the video. But it's a pretty easy one. But if you have something really small, like lots of little leaves that would be hard to stitch on, or something like a really skinny line, that might be a good way. Skinny like branch on a flower or things like that. It might be a good way to be able to stitch around the outside, so you don't have to actually stitch right on the fabric at all and risk fraying. So that's one. The other 3 are all in this little project that I did. And you are welcome to try this design, to try these techniques if you want. I do ask that you give me credit. I see, you know, people making things all the time and claiming it as their own on the internet, and I would love to at least get credit for the design, but that's all I ask. So this has 3 different techniques. So one of them is the rock quilting at the bottom, which is basically just a quilting pattern, but it's not a standard one that you would use on just anything. But I do use it a lot, and it's fun, and it's easier than it looks. So we'll talk about that one. And the next one is the trees and the moon. I did some stitching on the single layer of fabric before I sandwiched them and quilted and did the rest of the stitching. So that means the moon can have stitching on it, but still pop up a little bit and puff up. And the same with the trees. They're more 3-dimensional. Normally I do stitch my trees through all of the layers, but I thought I would try that for this, because I wanted to do this technique. It's not necessarily the best example of this technique, and so I'm going to try to link you to someone on Instagram that does amazing stuff with this. Actually, I'm not even sure she uses the same method, but you could, and they look really cool. So all right, and then the third one on this quilt is Inktense pencils or blocks to color fabric, and I have lots of fun with that. So if you don't even know what they are, then stick around, and that's how I added a little bit of color to this. And how that is related to free motion is you can do your outlining with free motion, and then you have basically made yourself a coloring page to color in your design. But you can also do it in reverse. You can color first and then stitch, and I'll actually show you a sample where I kind of did both. So let me show you a few more samples. I was wishing I had a quilt with these rocks on it because they're cool, but I don't. And I've done lots of them, but I've sold them all. But then I remembered, forever immortalized on the cover of Art Quilting Studio magazine. So at the bottom of this quilt, and this is actually just a section of a little bit bigger quilt, but that's how I did the bottom. And on the sample here, I'm going to talk about in the video, I used a more contrasting thread, so it looks a little bit messier on this one. And I could have gone in with Inktense and filled that in a little bit more, or I could stitch it more, but that just takes a long time. So if you use a little bit less contrasty thread, but you still want it to show, then you don't have to stitch it to death, and it can still look nice. Then here's a couple of the Inktense samples. These are both from Jody Bergsma coloring books, and she gives permission in her book to use them for your own use, or even for classes. So I do want to ask her sometime if I can use them in online classes, because they're so fun, and they're, you know, I I can't draw this well, so it's a great way to get designs to do this technique on. So the outlines were all done with black thread, and then I colored it in, and then I added more stitching after it dried on some of the things. So with some metallic thread, I don't know if that shows up or not. If I move it, sometimes that helps. And then here's another one of those, another Jody Bergsma. So those are really fun, and I'll show you a little bit more about Inktense pencils in here. And then I have one more sample, which is also rocks, and it's back to this technique with stitching down the appliques. And that is one of my collage. This is from my framed collage class. And normally in that class I have you put the appliques on top of the netting, but in this case I put them underneath so that I could stitch right around the edges, and again they puff up a little bit more than if I had actually stitched on top of them. It just has a little bit different look, and I like that. So I'm gonna wiggle it a little bit and hopefully you can see the glitter. That's the best part about these, and it doesn't show up in photos at all. It drives me crazy. So I hope you're trying some of these again and having fun with it. I think they get more fun each week. So, and I'm going to start trying to give you links to some other people to look up who do amazing things with some of these techniques that we're going to be getting into coming up here too, because you know, a lot of people will focus on, I like to try everything, but some people kind of really focus in on one technique and then they do amazing things with those. So so I hope you'll watch the rest of the video, and I hope you enjoy it. Okay, the first thing I'm going to do on this one is add a little bit of details to the birch trees and the moon. I've sketched them all on here, just roughly with some chalk, and I have the fabric in a hoop because I'm only going to be stitching on one layer, and you can't just stitch on one layer, especially free motion, without doing some kind of stabilizing. So a hoop is always the best stabilizer, but there are lots of other options. Basically any layer that you add counts as a stabilizer. So I have some tearaway, like paper-ish stuff underneath. I could also use wash away, but then I need to probably use something other than chalk to mark my design because I think it would disappear. So that would be a little bit tricky because I wouldn't want it to be permanent, but I wouldn't want it to wash away. So I might have to think about that for a minute if there's another way to do that. But hopefully this will be enough stabilizing. And let's see, I think I'm going to start at the bottom of the trees and just do a little bit of bark stitching. Usually I do this through all of the layers, but this time I'm just going to do it through what will be the top layer, and it will have a little bit of a different look. All right, I need to fix my tension. It's pulling the bobbin thread up a little bit. So I just stitch along the edge. It's very sketchy, and once in a while make a little kind of curvy, kind of following what would be the curve of the tree. And sometimes make a little blob. Try to not make them, oh, talking and sewing again, trying to make them kind of random, not too evenly spaced and not all the same size and whatever. Down the other side of the tree. Okay, turn around again because the back of my foot is hitting the... Ooh. Okay, so got some trees. I could even go back in the middle. Okay. And I think I'll add a little bit of stitching on the moon, and I'll finish my other trees, and then I will show you the next step. All right, I jumped ahead a little bit here and I finished the stitching on the trees, and then I did a little bit on the moon, and then I quilted the background. But before I quilted it, I stitched with I quilted it with white thread, and I stitched around each of these shapes with the white thread also, to just kind of, you know, help them. If I just did the swirlies, then the edges of the birch trees were kind of lumpy looking. So, so they needed to have some stitching just to kind of define the shape. And then quilted the rest of the background with some swirlies. I may still add a little bit of Inktense and get 3 for 1 on this, but I might just save that for another one also, or I might just do both, so we'll see. But what I'm going to do with the bottom part here is another technique I wanted to talk about this week. I never know if what I've already said, because I haven't done my intro video yet. So if I haven't already said it, I'm going to do the rock quilting here. I'm assuming that by now I have already shown you what this looks like when it's done. So, but the rock quilting is kind of just a quilting pattern, but it's a little bit different from one that you would normally use on a quilt, and it's extra fun, and it's not very hard at all. So I'm going to show you how to do that. So the first thing I do is, you could draw these on, but again, I often don't. I'm just going to start stitching some giant rock shapes. They don't have to be giant, but actually they should be different sizes. And for now, I'm making them pretty much touching each other. They're not going to end up quite touching each other, but for now, I don't want extra space because I want to be in control of how much space I leave between them. So I'm just making them different sizes and different shapes. Okay, if it's a little bit messy, because we're going to go over that again. Doesn't look too exciting yet. All right, I'm almost done here, and I just wanted to point out, you know, there's some backtracking. It's very messy, and that's okay. There's weird corners and angles, and we're gonna fix all of that. I also just noticed as I was sewing along, if anyone's familiar with neurographic art, this is a little bit like that. I don't know how I've never noticed that before, but it's super cool. It's artwork that's supposed to be kind of good for your brain. It has to do with circles and rounding off corners, and what I'm going to do in a minute. So I'm just going to finish my last couple of rocks, and I'll show you what's next. Alright, now I've got my basic rocks, and again, you can draw this, but it's really not necessary. As long as you just try to vary them a little bit and don't make them all exactly the same size and shape. That's all you really need to worry about. So now what I'm going to do is go back through the whole thing and fill in some of these little corners, and also make the circles around them probably a little bit wider. And this is something, so there's a lot of little triangles between the rocks, so I'm just going to kind of fill those in. doesn't need to be super solid because you can go over this as many times as you want. Anytime I find a little triangle like this, or part of a triangle, I will finish it off, fill it in. So here's another, any rock that doesn't have a rounded, that doesn't have isn't rounded on all the sides. So here's another one. So I'm looking for rocks that have little points on them, like this one. There's one here, there's one here, and just smoothing those corners. Turn this so you can see a little bit better. It's already starting to look a lot more like something. Scribbling like you would with a pencil. It's still very messy. All right, I meant to leave more at the end to talk a little bit more. What I can do now is I can go back over them again. I don't normally use this high contrast of thread. Usually I would use more of a matching thread, and then it doesn't need to be filled in as solidly. This looks like it has quite a few gaps, which is still actually okay, but I could go over it again, or I could take a colored pencil or Inktense and fill that in a little bit too if it was bothering me. If I wanted to, I could make my rocks a little bit smaller and the gaps a little bit bigger. So you kind of can't goof. If you accidentally drive into a rock, then you just make the gap bigger or turn it into 2 rocks. That's another option if you really whacked it. But yeah, you can't. If you start with them very close together, then as you fill in gaps, they get a little bit farther apart and the rocks get a little bit smaller. So you just want to start with them a bit bigger and closer together than you want them to end up. And then you just scribble in between, just kind of keep going around the edges. I probably will do a little bit more on here, and then try to round any pointy corners, and then fill in any little triangles. And I had like a pretty big triangle here, so I just made a little rock in the middle of it, so I didn't have to fill in quite as much. So that's about it for that step. And then we'll go on to a little bit of Inktense on here, I think. All right, I've had so much trouble with lighting lately that I decided to just try doing this one outside. Hopefully it's not too much lighting, and hopefully my 3 large dogs that are on the loose won't crash this party. We'll see how that goes. So I have done all the stitching, quilting. I did the the stitching first on the birch trees and the moon before I sandwiched it and quilted it, and that's just to give it a little bit of extra dimension so that stitching wouldn't flatten those things. It's not actually super obvious in this project, so it's may not have been worth the struggle, but that technique is really cool and can be really effective. But this may not have been the best example of it. I don't know. It's kind of cool. But my moon didn't show up very well. I didn't use enough of a contrasting thread, I guess, on that. The dimension still shows, and then I did the rock quilting at the bottom, and so now I'm going to add a little bit of Inktense to this. So that's another one of my, free motion techniques for this week. Just using the free motion to outline a design so that you can add some Inktense. And you can do that either before or after. You can do that, in either order. It doesn't really matter. I'm going to link another video with a little project for you, and maybe I'll even give you a template for it. But I also show you in the video how to draw it yourself, and it's not too hard. A little iris greeting card that's already been on my YouTube for a while. So I'm not sure how thorough I want to be talking about Inktense. I think, I'll try to add as much as I can without taking up too much time. So Inktense comes in pencil form and also block form, and I have the big sets, but I often try to use the little sets in videos just to show you that you can do a lot with 12 colors because you can mix them. So they kind of work like watercolor pencils, but they're actually ink, so they're permanent once they're dry. I need to learn how to do Amazon affiliate links. I'm always recommending products and then I get nothing. It doesn't cost you anything if I have a link, so I have to do that. Maybe I'll get it together by the time this comes out. We'll see. So anyway, obviously mine are a big mess. If they get this messy like this, you can just sharpen them and they're all nice and clean again. So, oh, whoops, I forgot something. I'm gonna have to go grab another thing here. But first, I'll just talk a little bit more about these. So they're ink, but they're in pencil form or block form, and there's tons of ways to apply them. I have a whole video that's very short, but it's just on 5 different ways to apply them, and there's probably even more than that. So I'm just going to add a little bit of color to this. I don't think I'm even going to add a ton because I kind of like the black and white look, but I will add a little bit of shading maybe and try to get my moon to show up a little bit better. So I'm going to have to pause my video so I can go grab one more thing, and then I will show you what I mean. All right, much like watercolor pencils, you can activate these with water, but you can also use textile medium, or you can use aloe vera gel also. And the advantages to this and the aloe vera gel is that it doesn't bleed as much. So just using straight water, it will soak into the fibers of the fabric and bleed a little bit more. And sometimes that might be the look you want, and sometimes it might not be. But I really prefer to use this stuff. And you can use paint brushes, or you can draw right on the fabric. I guess you would still need a brush. Here come the beasts. But I really love these fantastic blender sticks. So they kind of work like a paintbrush, but you can just, rub them on. It's something to keep in mind with these is the foam. It's just foam basically, but it goes all the way through. So if you want to rinse it off, don't just stick it in your water and let it sit there, because it will soak all the way through. So then no matter how much you dry it off, you're still going to get water, oozing out and causing your stuff to bleed. So I always just rinse them as quick as I can and then dry them off as quickly as I can, so that I don't get water all over the place. These come, I think these are both pointy tips. They have brush tips, but they also come in a rounder bullet point tip, which I don't use very often, so I don't even know if I have any. So these are usually available in like the rubber stamping section at Joann's, but they're available online also. Another thing I should come up with a link for, right? Okay, so one of the main ways I like to add these is to just draw lightly on the fabric. But you do want to draw lightly because maybe I'll just show you a little bit on this paper plate. So let's see, I'll get a dark color here, black. So I'm going to make it really dark, but then I'll do some lighter also. Let's see how this works. It's kind of a slick surface, so I'm not sure how it'll work, but we'll try it. All right, and then I just get this wet and then activate that. I should have done the lighter one first, right? Let's see if I can clean that off a little bit. Okay, but even the lighter one gets darker pretty quickly, and it'll be even more so on fabric, I think. So if you really want super light colors, you can try to draw very lightly, but it will still get darker than it looks when you're drawing, quite a bit. So another way is to just do what I just did, scribble on a surface like this, and just keep adding medium until it's the lightness that you want. So I want pretty light. So I'm just going to keep adding some medium over here to this lighter side. And then I can just come on here and start painting. And I'm going to start extra light because you can always add more, but you can't take it away. And once this dries, it's there. It's you can't re-blend it like watercolors, so I'm trying to kind of blend it into the center just a little bit as I go, so there's not kind of a hard line. So it's not showing up too much, but that's okay because I can't go the other way. All right, so I might just let that dry. And now I think what I'm going to do, so, well, actually, let me just show you. Another way to add it is just to get your blender stick wet and then just rub it on the end of the pencil. But that's going to be a lot more intense also. Look at that. So you only want to do that if you want super duper intense. Another way to get super duper intense is to wet your fabric first and then color right on it. I should have brought a scrap of fabric out here. Maybe I'll just try it on the paper towel. I think that'll work better than the paper plate. So let's say, I'm just gonna dip this in the water a little bit. Okay, so just get your fabric wet. Not that wet, but then just color right on it, and look at that. It's just very intense. So much more than if you're just drawing with it dry. So that you know, getting your fabric wet first with water or medium or whatever, but water again will bleed more, is a way to get the very most extreme intensity. But often that's not what we want. So to get the least intensity, the lightest colors, you want to just tint some of the medium. And that you can get as light as you want. It can be very, very subtle. So that's sometimes what I do. And then, yeah, other options are just drawing right on the fabric, but lightly, because it will get much more intense. And you can blend that way too. You can draw with a couple different colors. Maybe I'll do that. Let's see. I'll just do a little bit. You can barely see it. Just adding a bit of shading, probably on the wrong side from my moon. That's not good. All right. And then I'm going to take some brown, which I should have probably sharpened, but it's okay. I don't really want it super sharp. If you don't want it super sharp, you know, wear it down a little bit, because otherwise you will kind of get the little lines. You'll still see the lines if it's very sharp. So that's another good reason to use a different method to apply them if you don't want to see any lines at all. Okay, so it doesn't even look like I did anything, but I'm guessing this will show up even on camera once I start adding a little bit of medium. And if it's not showing up very well, then I'll make sure to at least photograph it or something in different lighting. So I'm trying to be fairly subtle here anyway, because again, you can always add more. With the puffy angle, it's hard to see the other side. So I could be painting in the right direction also, and that would probably be better. That's what I'm kind of trying to do, is follow the curve of the tree a little bit. But really, it's just gonna go where I put it anyway. Oh my goodness. All right, so I've got a little bit on my moon and a little bit on my tree. Not a ton on either one, because I can always add more. So now, let's see, maybe I'll go add an extra one of those in my hand for some reason. Maybe I'll add a little bit of shading to some rocks. Maybe add a little bit more so you can see it. I'm trying to do a little bit of color mixing here because I don't have a great color. I'll do some brown and a little bit of black. I'm not adding very much at all. These things last forever. The set of 12 I've had for years, and I've let groups use it, I've let kids use it. And there's still a lot of life in it. You can also get these individually sometimes, probably online, but also at Joann's, maybe Michael's, don't remember. So because they're a little pricey. So a little bit of shading on my rocks. So anyway, that's kind of just a quick overview of Inktense, but I will show you some other projects that I've made using this method, and then I'll show you this one when it's all done, but I won't make you watch me do the whole thing. So hopefully that's kind of most of what I need to say about that. I'm gonna rinse that quickly and then dry it as quickly as I can, because I don't want that water soaking up through the core. All right, I need to start doing these live so you guys can ask me questions. I think I will start doing that pretty soon, but anyway, kind of subtle, and you can go as subtle as you want, and that's partly why I wanted to do this, because getting Inktense to be intense is easy. That's what they're kind of made for, but you can do the whole range if you just know how to apply them. And then somewhere I'll link my video of the 5 different ways to apply them, not just like 5 minutes too. And I may have more that I even forgot to tell you just now, so I didn't write down a list. So all right, that's it for that one for now. All right, I have one more little quick one for this week, and this is attaching appliques with netting. Instead of stitching directly on the appliques, I'm going to put knitting over them and stitch around them. And so first I made my background. I fused these on, but you could just use a little bit of glue stick, because this is going to hold them in place. But it does help to have something holding them in place until you get there. You don't want them, you know, you don't want to get this all pinned down and then have them scooch around. But the reason for doing this, a couple reasons. One, this can be really handy for if you have very small pieces, like if you had a bunch of really small leaves but you really wanted to stitch around each one. This would be a great way to do it, because then you're not stitching on a tiny piece that doesn't have much room to begin with. So you can make very skinny lines. That's something I could have added to this. Like you could do very skinny trees or something that you wouldn't even really have enough room to stitch on. So that's one advantage. And then the other advantage is similar to what I did with the, you know, stitching the bark first. The whole tree will pop up a little bit then, because the stitching will be outside of it. The stitching won't be on the tree flattening it, although in this case I'll probably stitch the bark, so that will flatten it anyway. But if you aren't going to add any stitching on the applique shape, and actually maybe I'll put in a photograph of another quilt, not in here, I was thinking maybe I had it handy, that I did this on, and then you'll see better what I mean maybe from that also. But it can be, so in that case I really did want them to puff up a little bit. It was rocks. So all I need to do is stitch around these shapes. I could just stitch around them, but just outside of them. In this case I think I'm going to also add some bark, just because they're birch trees and that's what I do. So okay, oh nope, sorry, I already goofed. Not really, but I'm gonna still stitch around these. But if I was going to do bark, I would use a different color thread. I would use contrasting thread. If I'm just nailing down appliques, which is what I had in mind originally. Let's get my fingers out of the way. And then I want matching thread, not necessarily contrasting. So I think what I'm going to do, go around. My moon pretty much goes between the two trees. I'm always looking for ways that I can connect up. stitching. To the next one. So that's really it. They just, unless I wanted to go back and add details, but I might not, because I kind of like the fact that they're a little bit puffed up. And then I probably want to go add a little bit of quilting. I already had some underneath the netting, but I want to nail that netting down. So I'll just add a little bit more. Another thing that I should have done and didn't was, but I got away with it, was I'm using the open toe free motion foot. And whenever I'm working with netting, I try to use the closed toe one so that I don't catch on anything. But it didn't catch, so it's usually fine. But that's a helpful trick to know. All right, I think that's it for this week. I hope that they're getting more fun and exciting each week. I'm back. I realized that I should take this opportunity to show you my nifty template for cutting out greeting cards. Available on my website for, I think, $5. I've been wanting these for years, and I finally found a place that would make them for me. So they're clear, so you can see through them and line up your, greeting card. And this is why I make everything a little bit extra big, because then I can choose what I want to show, and I don't have to get it so exact in the first place. So anyway, my handy dandy acrylic template.